Good morning, everyone. Good morning, uh, our chief guest, Dr. Satish Kumar, our guest speakers, Mr. Neil Vezeau and Mr. Ramprasad Adhikari have already arrived. We will be starting the conference shortly. Please be patient. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first ever virtual conference organized by the joint efforts of Alliance Against AMR and IVSA Paklihawa chapter. We are extremely pleased to have our honorable guests and equally enthusiastic participants today. I am Prakriti Gurung, a BDS student at Nepal Medical College and an executive member of Alliance Against AMR.
And I'm Supriya K.C. from Nepal Medical College, also an executive member of Alliance Against AMR.
We are your hosts for today. All of us, with utmost enthusiasm and excitement, are gathered here to celebrate World Antimicrobial Awareness Week in order to highlight the need to protect crucial medicines beyond antibiotics, including antivirals, antifungals, and antiparasitics, which are critical to prevent and treat infections in humans, animals, and plants. Every year, WHO organizes World Antimicrobial Awareness Week, aiming to increase awareness of global antimicrobial resistance and to encourage best practices among the general public, health workers, and policymakers to avoid further emergence and spread of antimicrobial resistance. The slogan for 2020 will be Antimicrobials Handle with Care, and the theme is United to Preserve Antimicrobials. Previously, AMR was limited to the term antibiotics, but this year, WHO has expanded the scope of the campaign to all antimicrobials so that it will facilitate a more inclusive global response to antimicrobial resistance and support a multi-sectoral One Health approach. AMR is an increasingly serious threat to global public health. This is why we should be united to preserve antimicrobials as mentioned in this year's theme. Now, without further ado, let's start today's conference. First of all, I'd like to request Mr. Kushal Acharya, President of Student Working Committee Alliance Against AMR, to welcome our participants and guests with a welcome speech.
Hello.
Yes, Kushal.
Namaste everyone. I am Kushal Acharya. I proudly am the president of Students Working Committee Alliance Against AMR. I sell dreams and I peddle hope of the people who are looking tomorrow as a better context in the field of medicine. That's when I was called upon to talk about the future us. But naturally, it follows I'm going to talk about the present us. I want to offer my thanks to our regarded founder and mentor Satish Kumar Deo, Rector of Madan Bhandari Swasthya Vigyan Pratishthan, and Ms. Subha Sharma, President of IVSA Paklihawa, who have acknowledged our encouragement to direct this program for the integrated development in antimicrobial resistance use. Furthermore, from the deepest root of gratitude, I would like to welcome our guest speakers and thank all the members of Alliance Against AMR and International Veterinary Students Association for their obliging effort for the cause. As I like to believe, there is a certain voices we can use together for the good cause. So as I would like to welcome all the new members and also the brilliant minds that have brought up supporting our organization. I believe the enthusiasm of all fellow members will lead to the major functioning of our goals. Also, I would like to thank our guest speakers and of course our guest member Dr. Satish Kumar Dev for having having us today. I find myself very honored to be the voices that have led to be one of the voices that have led to positive path in enhancing the mentality of people about the causes, consequences of antimicrobial resistance. Furthermore, I believe work begins to define a person. I would like to believe same hope of using antibiotics would flow with freedom and speed. So as for this year's theme, I I hope we will be united to preserve antimicrobials. Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you, Kushal, for your warm welcome. Our chief guest for today is an honorable guest whose remarkable contributions in the field of antimicrobial resistance has been exceptional and highly praiseworthy. He is director of Madan Bhandari Swasthya Vigyan Pratishthan and the president of Alliance Against AMR. Let's welcome Dr. Satish Kumar Dio to share among us his insights on antimicrobial resistance.
So good morning, all. Am I audible to you?
Yes, sir. Good morning,
Oh,
sir.
thank you so much. Um, I would like to put my. Can you please? I wish to do screen sharing. Can you please give me authority to share the screen? Yeah, for screen sharing, please allow me for screen sharing. Hope all are able to see my screen sharing.
Yes, sir. It's visible.
Yes. Yeah, so I'm proceeding further, okay? Uh, Good morning, all, and thank you all for organizing this one of the most important events that is required for the human mankind, which we need to tackle. And on this special time of Antimicrobial Awareness Week, I'm here in front of you to present for a antimicrobial resistance and what One Health approach is doing for it. Myself, Dr. Satish Kumar Dev, Rector in Madan Bhandari Swasthya Vigyan Pratishthan. And what exactly I wish to do today is share is what exactly National Action Plan for Antimicrobial Resistance says, which is mainly based on Global Action Plan, which is published by WHO. So my whole of the area will be under discussion will be based on the documentation of a global action plan which Nepal has developed from, and we are going to implement that national action plan. I was working as a head of department Institute of Medicine, and I'm also secretary of Society of Clinical Pharmacologists. I was one of the members to work as a antibiotic technical working group committee of Ministry of Health and Welfare. I had worked in a ethical review board, and obviously uh, I had worked as a president of Alliance Against AMR for more than 5 years. I was also member of Department Council. So before I start my presentation, I would like to thank mainly all of you, especially to IVSA team from mainly from Paklihawa, and national team and international team, as well as my entire team of and Alliance Against AMR. You guys are awesome. Your hard work, and I can see your contribution, immense hard work during this entire period. And I really thank you all for your work without for something that will have a better change in the behavior of antimicrobial uses in upcoming days. I'm also author of these two books. So I guess you all know United to Preserve Antimicrobials, and we are not only listening to this slogan theme, we are also practicing that theme this time. And it's all because of you all. We are together with the concept of a One Health concept, uniting us with a veterinary team also. Probably next year, when we go, probably we'll have a team member from agriculture and and really practice One Health approach. I guess you all know the concept of antimicrobial resistance and the consequences were imagined 20 years back. In that time also, there were multiple steps taken from antimicrobial resistance that need to be prevented. But with that effort also, it was so less that it was said by that in that time that antimicrobial is a slow moving tsunami. So you can imagine that the depth of these words and the statement, what does this mean to say? And then what happened was all different bodies got activated, thinking mainly for prevention, detection, and response. So this package, this entire ideas were taken by global health security issues, WHO, country like USA, and United General Assembly. I guess you know that United General Assembly doesn't like to take a general health issue. Obviously, because of Corona, the situation has much more changed, but they normally take about conflict and the other issues. But these issues were taken by United General Assembly also. So there were different bodies which have given an order that okay, we need to fight on this, and this how the global action plan was introduced by WHO. I guess you all know this gentleman, Dr. Tedros, because he is because of Corona now everybody is regularly seeing his face in the TV. Then national action plan were developed, and it was noted that these issues were seriously taken by different other magazines also, that we should take care about antibiotics and all, and different other magazines like magazine like Nature. So these things are being extensively covered, and there are people who are working on this area from a long, long time. It's because the bacteria are much more powerful than antibiotics. You know this, that this kind of financial loss and the death is going to occur in a few years, and this is already known to us. And if we do not take action now, a time will come that our mother will not allow their children to play outside in the field, because they will say that once there is a small injury, the wound will not recover, and whole of the social dimension is going to change in a few years if we do not take appropriate action. This was prepared by me in 2016. I just wish to tell something about Alliance Against AMR to this new team, that we are a group of volunteers working from last 6 years, taking medical, dental, nursing, and all allied health sciences students from our different schools, and they all of us they volunteer for us, and they prepare a document. They do a different activities like taking a class, making a posters, or any kind of other activity you can think of to prevent antimicrobial resistance. If you see this picture, is that how post antibiotic era is coming, and how this will change the current treatment management of any kind of disease that is there in the world. Okay. So this was one initiation from a student of Institute of Medicine, and I found it very interesting. Probably you must have noted that there's a notice, from a MOHP also, that if you are really creative and if you are really good in art and this, you can put this. You can also have a participate in a competition that is there for a antimicrobial resistance. So it's just some idea related that how, if you think about antibiotics development, what you note is the new class of antibiotics is not developed from many years. New antibiotics of a same class is being tried, but those where many of them also have got a resistance. So it's not that long history we have. It's only in the 1940 around first clinical antibiotics was used, and with 60 years of time, there are many antibiotics which are going on to resistance, and we predicted that by 2050, none of the antibiotics is going to work. So probably we all are going to see that time that none of the antibiotics is working, for us in a human body. So with multiple steps that occurred in many times, they thought that the effort was not sufficient, and the global action plan was adopted by this, and this was also adopted by United Nations General Assembly Resolution 2. Later on, they developed a five strategic planning, and luckily, the concept of One Health concept was introduced with the World Animal Health Organization and the Food and Agriculture Organization. These are in combination working together to work against antimicrobial resistance. So, One Health. I guess you know what is One Health, right? When a disease occurs, it is not the cause of this may not be related to only a human, but it may have an impact from a different other aspect, that is a environmental aspect, veterinary and agriculture. So the concept of One Health was introduced, and this concept says that there we need to work together in a combination to fight against antimicrobial resistance. So we started our team with group of person who are working in a clinical side or a human side, but we are very excited now that by this time we are increasing our numbers and our team is expanding towards a group of people who are working in agriculture, veterinary side, agriculture side, and probably environment science also in a near days to come. So whole of the strategy have a basic three principle that it should have a coordination, collaboration, and the communication, focusing mainly on prevention, intervention, and rehabilitation. Okay, so this is a general concept that is there for our One Health, and this general concept will give us an idea that what are the five strategic objectives that we can do for a GAP-AMR or Global Action Plan AMR. If you see these five strategic objectives, what you will find is these are the areas that we need to address, and then are the areas we need to do activity on it. If you see for number one, you will find that it's for awareness. Number two is the evidence-based knowledge based on surveillance. Number three is the reducing the concept in incidence of infection, and number four is the rational use of antibiotics, and number five is the promote investment. If you see these 5 points, what you will note is these all 4.5 points are mainly broadly given in this way. So what you will find here is any awareness and understanding that Alliance Against AMR has taken up is one of the major theme that we have incorporated, and this is primarily based on communication and the education and training. So simply what I would like to say is for this awareness and understanding, if we have a group of people from a One Health concept, that what is the how irrationally antibiotics is being used in an agricultural field, or how irrationally antibiotics has been used in a veterinary or the poultry. If those things are we are able to detect, we can definitely do something for it. Now the steps are communication and information and education, communication and education and training. So we can develop any kind of communication tool to reach up to the people of to introduce about this. We can tell about the slaughterhouse, we can go to farmers, we can reach to any people that okay, these are the awareness and understanding required to prevent antimicrobial resistance. Similarly, other step that is has been followed in the knowledge and evidence, infection prevention control, optimized use and innovation R&D. One of the most area that is being worked by government is increasing the surveillance system, and the class surveillance system is already introduced by WHO and it's been working. Similarly, antibiotics should be used if there is an infection. If you reduce the concept of infection, antibiotics will definitely use will be obviously less there. And the concept of antimicrobial stewardship and the optimal use of antibiotics are one of the strategy. And obviously, we need to look for something which are more innovative, and more research are required. So, how we can collaborate based on these five strategic objectives? If you take these first four, whatever the area of interest you have in your mind, you can take up that and convert that into publication or come into research ideas, so that you will have a more and more evidence generated related to antimicrobial resistance. So any ideas that you see around can be based on this four of the ideas that is there, and Alliance Against AMR in more active area. This we are more focused on a strategy one of awareness and understanding. So in Nepal also the similar roadmap has been developed to combat against AMR, and it's again a five strategy based on the first four global action five action plan only. So we have to look for something. Obviously, the whole of the idea will be optimal use of antimicrobials. So for that, you can reduce the infection, you can prescribe antibiotics based on a surveillance system, or improving awareness, prevent the irrational use of antibiotics, and these things can be done. So, in conclusion, AMR is a burning global issue, and Nepal is no exception. And we need to work multi-sector setting and collaborate with each other to tackle this problem. And we had a plan to join, and we are gradually joining to a more and more people. When I started antimicrobial resistance campaigning as a leader for it, I never thought that I will be involved so emotionally and so sentimentally, that because I gradually realized that the problem that people are human mankind is going to face is so extensive, so immense and emotional, that the day will come that the whole of the lifespan is going to end, and there will be no surgery possible. There are so small things we need to have it will grow in a bigger way. So I just wanted to say that probably if this corona things recovers, this antibiotic resistance is going to become a next global pandemic in the near future. Thank you all. Thank you all for your time and listening to my presentation. Any question, any queries you have, you can please ask me and we can have. Or and again, I would like to thank uh, team of IVSA Paklihawa along with my team of antimicrobial resistance that for giving me an opportunity to share my few words in this platform, first virtual conference organized by Alliance Against AMR and IVSA Paklihawa. Lastly, I would like to say that if the world fails to mount more serious effort to fight infectious disease, antimicrobial resistance will increasingly threaten to send the world back to pre-antibiotic era. Now we are already moving towards a pre-antibiotic era, and we need to fight against this. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your words and insight. Now, if you have any queries for our sir, you can raise your hand and please ask. Uh, Sir, we have a question from Ashish Adhikari. With the
Yes, Ashish.
with the prospects of low profitability, how do you think would we be able to cope with the lack of new antimicrobials like antibiotics? Yeah.
Um, is there a message box? Like I didn't understand the question clearly.
Um, he asked, with the prospects of low profitability, how do you think would
Okay.
we be able to cope with the lack of new antimicrobials?
It's very different and interesting question, I guess. Okay. See, you are correct that um, you are probably thinking that the antibiotic business is going to come down and is going to have a low profitability. If your statement is correct, then okay, again the countries like the global leaders are responsible to reaching and newer develop newer antibiotics reaching to people for saving a human mankind. And again, I will not say that it is not going to have a low profitability. Imagine if there is no antibiotics and there are only few antibiotics remaining which is working in our body. How do you think it's going to have a low profitability? There will be big profit. The big pharma industry is very big. Okay.
Thank you, sir. I hope your queries were answered. Any more questions? Sir, we have a question on the chat box.
Yes, Usha Khatri. Um, See, Usha, like when we talk about antibiotics, right, there are certain areas or some cell organs which are targeted for killing those bacteria. Okay. What is been searched through is there are identifying a new target site that can kill antibiotics. So if the new antibiotics are developed targeting a different clinical sites or different cell organelles, obviously that will have a long-term effect, and that will have a bactericidal effect to it. So new development means there is identifying a new target site for killing a bacteria. And this is how the antibiotic new development will help us for this. Hope I am clear to you, Sir Khatri.
Sir, then is it of different range or only the target sites are different?
See, development of new antibiotic means identifying a different target site for killing antibiotics. Okay. So these are a newer areas that will explore. See, we are trying to identify something, a different target site for killing a virus, right? It's
Yeah.
similar to the case of antibiotics also.
So are there any updates of like these innovations?
Not exactly. There are newer promising sites for development of newer drugs, but not exactly. There are no promising results so far. That's why we are more focusing on a preventive part rather than identifying a new drugs.
Then I have another query. I think it might be off topic, but I have in my mind that does the tourism lead to antimicrobial resistance? I mean, does tourism increases the probability of antimicrobial resistance in any country with the less population?
I haven't read about these things, what you have said, okay, but what is my understanding is obviously traveling and all will definitely lead to a introduction of a newer strains of a bacteria and the viruses in a different area. And probably that may lead to a development of a newer strain in that newer community which are traveling abroad. And that may lead.
Okay, thank you.
But my answer is not something which is based on something which I've read, like published article based. Okay.
Okay, thank you, sir. I'm done with my queries.
Thank you so much for your queries. And thank you, sir, for your insight and your we are really proud and grateful to have your support and guidance. One Health. As we are aware, One Health is an approach that recognizes that the health of people is closely connected to the health of animals and our shared environment. Given the important and interdependent human, animal, and environmental dimensions of antimicrobial resistance, One Health approach is an important aspect that is bound to be addressed. Now, in order to express his perspective on One Health approach to antimicrobial resistance, we have a special guest speaker among us. He is a final year veterinary and MPH student at Iowa State University, USA, who founded the internationally award-winning Iowa One Health Conference. He also served as Vice President at Large and as the President of the International Student One Health Alliance. Currently a Trustee of International Student One Health Alliance, we welcome Mr. Neil Vezeau.
Thank you for the introduction. And also thank you for having me. It's really an honor to be here from, halfway across the world. And I hope to learn as much from you all today as hopefully you're able to learn from this talk. So just let me share my screen really quick. All right. So first of all, I'm interested in how many of you are familiar with the concept of One Health already. If people can just kind of put that generally in the chat, we can just get a good gauge of the audience.
Yeah, we know.
Sorry, what was that? What was that, Ashwini?
Yeah, we know a bit about One Health concept and
Excellent.
the meaning. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Ashwini. So that's, of course, what the presentation today is over. And we'll start off by going a little bit over how antimicrobials are used in the animal sector, just to get everyone on the same page in that regard. So most animal use antimicrobials are going to be, of course, the same drugs as you would use in humans. One of the main exceptions to that, though, is or are the class of ionophores. You'll mostly see those used in food animals, though I believe that they're being experimented on as a cancer treatment for humans, though of course you're not going to see any mechanically as much crossover with that as far as transmissibility as you would with an infectious disease like bacteria. And when you see data reported on antimicrobials used in animals, those classes, or more so ionophores, will be in that data set. So if you have just a big, this many antimicrobials were used in animals this year, that's going to confound your data on it, because not all of it's going to be important to human health. So that presents as kind of a big problem in tackling antimicrobial resistance from sort of the animal side of things. So let's go over the animal sectors that use antimicrobials the most. So in the livestock industry, that's swine, and I believe this is worldwide, and then beef, and then chickens and poultry, and potentially aquaculture, though this is characterized the least of any of them. There's not a whole lot of antimicrobial work in aquaculture, and it's one of the sort of next frontiers of research in that field. And I'm still working to sort of finally confirm this, or ultimately confirm this, but this is, I believe, a rough estimate of the amount of antimicrobials used in the animal sector, and the more so the livestock sector, and the amount used in human medicine. And again, some of that can be confounded by if many of those are ionophores or not, which again are not or are barely used in human medicine. Sorry about that. Okay, so why are antimicrobials used in livestock, or used so heavily in livestock? Of course, they're used for health, just like they would be in humans. You can treat active infections with them, which is probably the most straightforward and obvious use. In many jurisdictions, you can use them to prevent a possible infection. which is known otherwise as metaphylactic use in many animal operations in the United States, for example. If one of your animals in your herd breaks out, then you would kind of suppose that many of the others in the same herd are at risk, and you might go on and give the rest of the herd antimicrobials so they do not get sick as well. And this is, of course, if you suspect a bacterial agent for the cause of the infection. And you can also use them for growth promotion, and that's called different things throughout the world. As the United States Food and Drug Administration terms it, that's production purposes. Other people say prophylactic. Some people say subtherapeutic, though I think that's kind of fallen out of favor in the literature recently, at least. And then antimicrobial growth promotants is one of the most common universally used terms, and that's what we'll be discussing them as in the rest of this talk. And as you can see here on the graphic, this is just a rough estimate from 2010, or rather of the time period 2010, of the amount of antimicrobials used per head of animal or per animal in that jurisdiction. So this is animal food production worldwide, again, estimated from the time period of 2010. This is FAO data. And you can see moderately, basically similar levels of production in the Americas and Europe, and just an explosion of activity here in East Asia, and also expanding growth in South Asia as well. And among those, many different food interests or food sectors or animal sectors seen in those areas. Of course, China has a lot of pork production, and the Indian subcontinent has a lot of buffalo specifically production. Basically, as the world gets richer and richer, we're going to get more and more animals. A real staple kind of worldwide of people moving into sort of the middle class or even just kind of lower middle income country status is an uptick in animal food production and consumption of animal source foods. And as you get even more and more wealthy from there on, then you're going to get more and more pet ownership. So basically, we're probably going to see the world be making more and more use of animals as time goes on. And that's going to make, of course, the issues around antimicrobial use and resistance in animals and its implications for human health bigger as well. And this is just a map showing how much these areas of the world are growing and how fast. And as you can see here, South Asia, East Asia, Southeast Asia are, again, areas of just kind of explosive growth. And of course, Nepal is no exception. So these are areas of the world that currently and increasingly so will be making use of animal food. And this is corroborated by just a trend of meat production in each region of the world. And you can see that Asia by far has the most growth of all these continents. And then you can see that by sector, poultry and pigs are growing the most. And again, this is specifically pork producing countries. And again, just like we saw with the FAO data, China is really the biggest player in this, then the EU in its entirety, and then the United States. And kind of a trend that you'll see in all of these and some of the most produced animals throughout the world is wide representation of BRICS countries. Again, as you really move up in population size, especially in socioeconomic status, as the BRICS countries are, you're going to be making more and more use of animal source foods and consuming more and more animal source foods. And for those who aren't familiar with the BRICS countries, that's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And of course, Nepal is between two of those, China and India. So you guys are going to be at the center of a lot of this expanding activity and basically a lot of very, very important things happening in relation to global issues, and certainly antimicrobial resistance and animal source AMR among many others. So this is a rough estimation of, again, the time period 2010 for antimicrobial growth promotants. Again, AGP, not for sort of medical use in animals, but for making them bigger, used in animals within basically the entire world. And as you can see, the United States, European Union, Brazil, China, and also India are highly represented. So again, India and China, big areas of growth. So that's that can be viewed as a problem by many people. And here's AGP use by country, and this is also how it's expected to grow over time. So again, China, USA, Brazil are heavily represented. China is expected to grow massively, as is India. China, Brazil, and India are also proportionally expected to grow kind of explosively. And by sort of animal category, you can see that pigs have sort of a low sort of standard deviation of usage, but a high median usage per animal. Chickens, wide standard deviation, but also pretty high use per animal on average. And then cattle are sort of lower in terms, because their production systems tend not to be as intensive, I suppose, because you can kind of put them on the field and out to pasture and let them feed and graze. They're a ruminant basically, so you're not going to have them inside being on special feed for the entirety of their lives. And these are estimated, not antimicrobial use, not AGP use, but antimicrobial resistance levels. This study is by the same guy as we were looking at with the last data set. This only looked at LMICs though, and China, India, and Iran are areas of high resistance, as they found. So one thing that's very important to consider is we're talking about antimicrobial resistance arising in bacteria that are in animals. But I mean, how do they get to humans? It's kind of obvious, and it kind of stands to reason that they would, but we, of course, want to mechanically understand all the individual parts of how they move into the human sphere so we can try and quantify how much it does happen and get a good idea of what we need to do to solve it and to mitigate it as a problem. So you can see here that just from production of antimicrobials for animals, as far as industrial effluents of water, that gets into treated water systems, and alongside human sewage and animal sewage, of course, that's going to create a large vat of antibiotics as well as bacteria that are exposed to those antibiotics and thus resistance to them. So basically, fecal matter in its entirety between animals and humans is going to be a huge source of that, because antibiotics that are eliminated fecally through the GI system tend to are by definition not metabolized in the body. So that's where you're going to see a lot of those effectively wasted antimicrobials. And of course, in a lot of production systems, at least that I'm familiar with, you would go and put and fertilize your cropland with manure. So then, of course, that manure, if it were to have antimicrobial resistant bacteria on it, that was zoonotic, like E. coli, something else like that, that could get onto your crops and then make its way into not just animal food sources, but plant food sources as well. And this is another graphic just demonstrating the massive systemic complexity that you would see with all of these different factors, organisms, biomes, ecosystems, and how that helps spread, or how that's a conduit for spread of antimicrobials and antimicrobial resistance from the livestock sector to the human sector. And that's really a large part of the environmental component of the One Health triad of this issue, that being, of course, humans, animals, environment. So as far as quantifying the extent of zoonotic AMR, Again, we want to understand the mechanics underlying it so we can quantify, or at least try to quantify how much there is. However, there's not much data on exactly how much antimicrobial resistance is actually causing clinical disease in humans, let alone carriage of it. There's a lot more articles on simply, farm workers or veterinarians that are in contact with animals that consume antimicrobials tend to have carriage of, let's say, methicillin resistant Staphylococcus aureus, or MRSA for short. But that, of course, is a different thing entirely from if they're clinically sick, which is, of course, the main thing we're mostly going to be worried about. So again, this issue is very hard to quantify. The biggest sort of area or sector or jurisdiction that's even tried to take a stab at this is the EU. And thus far, they've put out 2 joint reports between the European Food Safety Administration, I'm not exactly sure on that name, as well as the European Medical Association, or the European Medicine Association, basically a pharmaceutical sort of overseer, as well as their ECDC, so the European Centers for Disease Control. And they put out like a joint report, and that basically tries to correlate or associate antimicrobial use and resistance in animals and humans. So you can directly take the animal use of antimicrobials in these jurisdictions and take the resistance seen in clinical isolates from clinically sick humans, and basically look at the exact same species of bacteria and look for resistance for the same antimicrobial that's used in the animals, and try and correlate that and see if you can connect the dots. And basically, there's shown to be a weak positive correlation between uses of some antimicrobials in animals and some antimicrobial resistance in humans. But again, you're dealing with so many steps in this ecological chain, so many sort of dimensions of freedom, that it can be really hard to get a handle on exactly how much of a problem it's causing. So as far as AGP regulations, Europe, again, is kind of really big on the scene in this. Europe was the first to ban use, and they kind of got their start in the 1970s, and they finally banned all AGP usage in 2006. There's more regulations to come. The United States also began enacting bans in 2017 for AGPs, and there a lot of other jurisdictions, as I understand, are kind of following suit, but it's going to take some time for the majority of the world to really start cracking down on this. So reasons that you would want to lower AGP use, of course, are public health concerns. For some, actually for the United States more so, it can cause a export market concern, because if you're exporting from a country that allows AGP usage to one that does not, then they might not want to take your animal source foods because they would be worried about resistant bacteria being present on that meat or on that food. So it creates some trade issues there. Also, consumer demand. It's in countries where basically people have enough income to sort of worry about whether there's antimicrobial use or how much antimicrobial use there is in animals. You might see them demanding basically less use of those antimicrobials. So that can be a driving factor. And then, of course, all of these might spur on regulatory changes, which pretty much by definition would need to drop the usage of antimicrobials, or of AGPs specifically. So as far as the livestock sector and what we're going to do with that moving forward, what we can expect to see with that moving forward, rapidly developing areas of the world will, of course, be demanding more animal source foods. There will be more pressure on the livestock sector to lower their antimicrobial usage of any kind, and intersectoral monitoring and evaluation of these efforts really needs to be continued and integrated in a One Health manner. And luckily, a lot of countries are doing this. A lot of them explicitly reference One Health as a term and how to implement it in their national action plans for AMR. which is really great to see. And of course, there's the WHO, OIE, and FAO tripartite that also works to enable these efforts at the global international level. So as far as companion animals, and again, this is something that we're going to see more so in high-income countries. It's mostly health-related as far as usage of antimicrobials in companion animals. The data on that use, though, is pretty limited. In the United States, for example, the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, puts out a report every year about antimicrobial use in animals, or not use actually, but antimicrobials shipped or sold for use in animals. So you're not even getting data on what's used. And that's all of the livestock sector, as well as I believe some of the veterinary companion animal sector together. So that really confounds things and makes it hard to get a handle on exactly what is being used for what. As far as zoonotic AMR from companion animals, the research is pretty sparse. There's a decent amount of reports of veterinarians, animal owners carrying bacteria from animals. There's from their companion animals or from companion animals that they work with. There's one report on gastrointestinal disease that's attributable to zoonotic pathogens from animals, though there's not as much of a focus in that paper, I believe, on resistance specifically to antimicrobials. As far as what we should do moving forward, what we can expect to see moving forward, some jurisdictions are beginning to put forward, and some professional organizations are starting to put forward more examples and more standards for what you should do to be judicious in your use of antimicrobials. However, monitoring for antibiotic resistance, AMR in animals, is a bit of a patchy effort right now, and usually takes the form of scientific studies from academic sectors, but hopefully that will sort of change moving forward. And companion animal clinicians and other prescribing health professional bodies should be working towards standardizing their systems and harmonizing their regulatory infrastructures. And that's part of what actually WSAVA, or the World Small Animal Veterinary Association, pushes for. And this is basically a quick review of how to reduce really anything that's a hazard within an industrial sort of setting or within many settings. And elimination, of course, is the biggest one. So if you eliminate your antimicrobial use, or if you lower your antimicrobial use, you're going to see less resistance, and other things down the chain from there, like using PPE is great and you should do it, but it's not going to be nearly as much as just simply lowering your level of use. So as far as One Health-based AMR education programs, if we're sending out the slide sets after this, here's some links to these. Europe is really on top of the game with this again. They have the One Health European Joint Program and has various trainings. And also notably, health professionals and students working across the EU have joined together multiple times in recent years to try and integrate education for those health professions, which is really great to see. And I'm really interested to see where that goes moving forward. So these are common problems or common issues that health workers can try and tackle in a combined front of One Health. And that includes prescribers of medications, so physicians, veterinarians, dentists, and there also should be a focus on preventative medicine, which includes vaccination, of course, educating the clients that antimicrobials aren't going to be used for everything, and implementation of systems that prevent imprudent prescription by the medical professional themselves. And also, of course, biosecurity improvements and everything, which would be a big deal, more so in the livestock sector, but can also be implemented I mean, basically wherever you want. And also reaffirming the prioritization of environmental health. That's very important. And you need to help and aid intersectoral collaborations to that or towards that end. So as far as what youth and all of you can do about antimicrobial resistance, there's quite a few things. First of all, and this is a bit philosophical, be passionate, professional, and compassionate in all that you do moving forward. And that would include, if you really have a vested interest in the issue, antimicrobial resistance. Create one really just kind of hard, concrete action point you can do moving forward is creating a map and contact info for all of the student organizations in your area or country or whatever region you want to limit yourself to, if any limit at all, for all the student organizations that you might consider reaching out to or might want to be working jointly on an AMR related issue. Then you can identify with that and expand your AMR stakeholder groups, build capacity across them, and then look and learn to see what professionals in AMR relevant sectors are doing to help integrate with other health sectors and make interdisciplinary collaborations and connections. And with that, hopefully we can basically earn the trust of the professionals that are working sort of above us at this point in time and have them trust us as they pass on the chain of command to us moving forward. And then as we do move forward, hopefully we'll be moving forward with the connections to our counterparts in human medicine, in pharmacy, in dentistry, in whatever, so we can work towards integrated education in AMR as well as prudent use for antimicrobials, surveillance infrastructure, and also policy that's going to be in the professional levels as well as at the species level and also across national lines. So there's a lot of work to be done, but it's something that is certainly doable as we move forward with time. As some sort of final conclusions, antimicrobials and antimicrobial resistance is a big kind of existential threat for humans, but it's also an opportunity and it's going to be a big driver of interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary collaboration moving forward. These are links to One Health educational resources. Again, if this gets sent out as a slide set, it's something you can make use of. And with that, are there any questions?
Thank you so much, sir, for the delightful experience. If you have queries for Mr. Neil, you can raise your hand or drop your queries in the chat box.
Okay. So I see we have a question. What are the mechanics of AMR from companion animals and pets? So they're effectively the same as what you're going to see in any other sector, including livestock and human medicine. Again, antimicrobials aren't going to be used really for growth promotion and in companion animal and pet in the companion animal and pet sectors. So it's going to be more along the lines of what you would see in human medicine. I don't know what antimicrobials are prescribed for what at what levels, basically differentially between the animal and human sectors, or the companion animal and human sectors, or what the ratio is of just overall use or use per unit biomass between companion animals and humans. But that would be very interesting to see if that data exists or if we can generate that data in the future. Does that kind of answer your question?
Now, Miss Usha Khatri has raised her hand.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Hello?
Yes.
I have a question. Despite of the majority of antibiotics being used in farm animals, why are wildlife sorbed to be threat of it?
Sorry, what was how do we get rid of it? That is a good question. So one of the things that you might see, and there's I've seen a couple resources and studies about this, about wildlife effectively being a reservoir of antimicrobial resistance, not dissimilar to how you might see pigs, wild hogs, boars serving as reservoirs of African swine fever, as has been a big concern in Eastern Europe and in China. As there's contact between, especially outdoor operations that don't have a whole lot of biosecurity or separation between them and the wildlife, you might expect there to be a transmission of any of a variety of diseases, including antimicrobial resistant bacteria. And does that get at what you were asking?
For example, I have suppose there once it was the case of the Ebola, and now it is the current pandemic case of the COVID-19. Yes, and these kind of disease are such that when we get this disease, then we are and that our mental most of the people think of that antibiotic use can help to get rid of these kind of diseases. For example, in the COVID-19 situation, there was a rumor of getting antibiotics, and many people have used it, and there have the emergence of the antimicrobial resistance. Yes, then so as we seeing the sources of the COVID-19, it has been clear that it might be from the wild bats or platypus or etc. So how does that kind of wild animals can be are susceptible to cause us the antimicrobial resistance? I want to ask like that. My question goes like that.
Okay, I'm sorry I didn't quite get your question the first time, but we can take another stab at it.
For example, you have already shown that in PDF that AGP, using AGP lead us to antimicrobial resistance via animals, as we consume the food animals and through the manure and crops, right? Then how the wild animals, due to wild animals, we are getting such type of diseases which are from the antimicrobial resistance.
Yeah, so because antimicrobials are mostly going to be used by humans, at least in the quantities and specifically for the bacteria that are of diseases of relevance to humans and other mammals, basically humans, human use animals, domesticated animals. Antimicrobials that are dispersed by humans and things connected to that somehow are mostly going to be the drivers of resistance problems that we see, as opposed to anything being emergent from the wildlife, is my understanding. But of course, you can find resistance genes for a ton of things in the wild without any connection to human use of antimicrobials, simply because you have these microbes competing with each other, just like we'd want to have our own normal flora or microbiome outcompete any bacteria trying to infect us.
Yeah, now it's clear.
Okay.
Then again, can I raise another question too?
Sure.
What is are there any predictions of One Health and AMR? As we have seen that WHO releases its report saying AMR as a threat, right?
Mhm.
And in May 2015, the One Health approach has emerged due to the condition of AMR. So, what is the future of AMR and One Health?
Oh, that's a very good question. As far as at the global level, it only seems like there's going to be increased attention basically given to these interdisciplinary ways of looking at things. And a lot of it is kind of the crossover between animals and humans. And it's really something that I hope for, and that many people hope for in the One Health spirit, that the environmental component does not get left out, because again, that's extremely important as far as transmission pathways of antimicrobial resistant bacteria from animal operations or from animal production systems to sort of the public at large, or people at least who aren't in direct contact with those animals. And of course, coronavirus has really brought to the pretty much global attention of society at large that animals can serve as a source of human health problems, just like coronavirus, with likely origin in bats or pangolins. And I'm not incredibly well read up on that, so sorry if I got some technicalities there wrong. But I think you're going to see more and more integrated systems moving forward. Again, a lot of national action plans do reference specifically a One Health approach. And it's probably worth saying that sometimes One Health can be just used as a buzzword, so to speak. And this is actually one of the main criticisms that you might see of sort of just One Health as a concept in general. And there's at least one national action program, for example, that simply just references One Health once. And I'm not sure how much it actually discusses the details of how it would go about with intersectional and transdisciplinary work on surveillance of antimicrobial resistance. And sort of on the flip side of that, you might see a lot of basically operations or approaches to surveillance, or really anything health related for that matter, that does involve these widely transdisciplinary approaches, but does not label itself One Health, even though it really does fit the definition, checks off all the boxes. So basically, you're going to see it expand as we realize that there's just a lot of systemic complexity that we're working, and human health and environmental health and animal health aren't separate systems, but are part of just one big. Recognizing that more and more, the science is laying that more and more out as time goes forward. So you can expect that to work its way into policy and any other variety of things that decide how we go about our business as a human society moving forward.
Yeah, thank you, and welcome to Nepal virtually. Okay, thank you. I'm done with my queries.
No, thanks for the questions.
We have Mr. Ashish Adhikari, who's raising his hand.
Oh, good question.
All right.
And
my question, are you hearing me?
yeah.
My question is this, I'm just taking the views of different speakers. I had asked to Dr. Dio also previously. So what do you think about the low profitability concept in the case of antimicrobials like antibiotics? And how would we uh, how would we able to cope with the lack of the new antimicrobials with the concept of low profitability?
Yes. So there's a variety of nonprofits, NGOs that have been set up to try and establish basically a sector of people who are working towards development of new antibiotics as a nonprofit motivated system. And of course, the pharmaceutical industry is massive and has a lot of resources to approach the development of more antimicrobials, but just because the costs are so high to find new ones, and I'm really not well versed in the actual process of drug development, but for even for them, it's just too much. So kind of like that pyramid of that hierarchy of change, elimination of your base threats or antimicrobial use is probably going to be one of the best ways to move forward. And there's various things you can use to sort of replace antibiotics and antimicrobials. And one of them is phages, bacteriophages. They're basically viruses that just infect bacteria. Instead, they are actually more specific to certain bacteria, certain strains of bacteria than you would ever see an antimicrobial drug be. So that's really great. But the development pathways for those just aren't nearly as developed or robust as just a simple, or not simple, but more commonly done drug development system and drug industrial production system. So they're not really widely used and are much more in an experimental phase than antibiotics. So really practical things moving forward are just going to be vaccinations. That's a huge thing. And for example, there's vaccinations against many, or at least in the animal sector, many bacteria. And one of the biggest ones you might be familiar with in the human sector would be, I believe it's the BCG vaccine. That is, that's of course against tuberculosis and other mycobacterial agents, mycobacterium complex. But the efficacy on that isn't great, at least not as much as some other vaccines, but of course, it still offers some level of protection or lowering of risk levels. And of course, the flu virus helps mitigate the problem of influenza, which is a immunosuppressive virus. So it's going to help you fight off any other sort of infection, including bacterial, that you might have. So there's a lot of ways to sort of work around this problem. And it's really just one of the big issues with moving forward with those things is just how much can we scale back antibiotic use, trying to eliminate and decrease antimicrobial resistance, and then scale up the use while maintaining a similar level of efficacy as before with those things like phages or vaccination strategies, anything like that. And I hope that got at what you were saying.
Thank you. Now we have Nabina Mia. Miss Nabina Mia.
Yes, first of all, thank you so much for your quite insightful session. I thoroughly enjoyed and learned a lot. What I would like to say and ask is, most of us, medical student, we are into scientific dimension. We know a lot about scientific data and mechanism, how antimicrobials, how antibiotics work, how resistance is being taken place. We know a lot about mechanism, but where we lack is critical thinking, how to consult with people, how to teach laymen about what can we do from our own home to reduce this resistance. So what I would like to ask you is, how to consultate people, how to counsel them about this resistance. I hope you got me.
Yeah, that's a very, I'm honestly having trouble thinking of immediate examples of how one might go about basically educating the public on antimicrobial resistance in a sort of actionable way. Sometimes, especially if you're trying to engage like a consumer group, and in the United States, that was actually really a huge driving force behind getting more regulation around antimicrobial use in animals, basically drumming up that sector by informing them about antimicrobial resistance, and that being a resultant of antimicrobial use. So just informing them and educating them on what it is can be enough. And it's a complex problem to understand. I was talking to a fellow public health student actually who believed that antimicrobial resistance was when humans become resistant to antimicrobials, and that's not a slight against her, it's just saying that it's kind of a tough issue to just immediately understand, and you can only ask for so much attention from sort of the public at large. So engaging civil society first, engaging people who might have some interest in learning that is actually, the bacteria that become resistant to antibiotics in a natural selection manner, in a Darwinian selection manner, like you would expect with any other evolutionary process. That's how it works. You try and educate those people and disseminate information as you can from there. As far as actionalizing less use of antibiotics in the human population, a lot of that's going to come from, or I think a lot of that is speculated to come from basically training doctors to sort of not give in to clients or be able to have more productive and thoughtful interactions with clients that won't result in a non-judicious prescription or sort of a needless prescription of an antimicrobial for a condition that does not merit it, just to sort of satiate the supposed needs of the clients who might be asking basically for a pill to solve what they're going through. I'm not really as keen on that side of things, but because health professionals are the main ones who actually have access to give out and distribute antibiotics, that's going to be one of the main sources of cutting off their non-judicious use. And of course, you can buy over-the-counter antimicrobials in many sectors of society, which I actually just thought of. So that's another big thing. And basically engaging the public in any sort of PR campaign is going to be necessary to go through the whole political process of maybe trying to stem use in a regulatory sense, or get people to understand they should just be using antimicrobials in more limited cases. That's a whole nother can of worms, though. Basically, though, this emphasizes the importance of taking a One Health approach, an interdisciplinary approach, with working with PR people or people who do human relation or public relations, and work more on the interactions with other people side of things to effectively get out a message.
I have one more query, if you allow.
Yeah.
So I'm studying dental surgery, and I'm asking you this question as per my practice. In case of Nepal, we have got this, we can call it culture of syndromic management. For example, without any proper diagnosis, we go to the symptoms and we use antibiotics as per the symptoms. And the most used ones are broad spectrum antibiotics. And what I would like to ask you, is this practice of syndromic management where we use broad spectrum antibiotics so haphazardly, how much is this, adding resistance, and what future behold for this practice? Do you get me?
Yeah. And I don't want to talk too much about things dealing with practices or best practices that I don't truly understand. But actually, can you repeat the last part of your question real quick?
My question was, practicing haphazard use of broad spectrum antibiotics to treat symptoms, that is syndromic management. How much is it adding the resistance going on and on?
Yeah, and I'm honestly not quite so sure on that one. I can definitely look that up. And if any materials are sent out after the webinar, I'd be more than happy to try and include that in any of those materials insofar as I'm able to. But I'm afraid I don't know off the top of my head.
It's okay. I think we shall jump to some other audience for question then. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Nabina. Now, a question from the chat box. Miss Priyanka Tulachan, she asks, recently in Denmark, there has been a decision to cull all its mink due to the findings of mutated form of coronavirus in them. So despite the invention of vaccines, will there be such kind of situation rising again in the future where we will have to cull animals to avoid humans from getting the disease?
Yeah, really good question right there. As far as specific to antimicrobial resistant bacteria, I'm not quite sure what the future would hold for that. I'm not sure if I would envision it happening for antimicrobially resistant bacteria, but maybe if it's more to your point or more to your question, with viruses, of course, that could be a different case. With vaccines, if a vaccine exists, that's excellent. If we presuppose that into any sort of circumstance, then we'd also have to ask, how effective is it? How widespread is its use? And how long does it offer protection for? And so those are all factors, of course, that would go into any decision like this, I would imagine. And even in the United States, there's plans to, cull animals, and this has been done in, I believe, Argentina and the UK as well, to wipe out spread of foot and mouth disease, which is only an animal. Well, it can cause very slight disease in humans, but it's really something that's not even much of a consideration, but it's something that is very contagious in animals, and for that you would consider culling many animals before it basically wipes out sort of your animal agriculture economy, or a sector of it at least. So if that were to present its risks to human life, then of course that would be a much more serious issue, and you would probably see the culling of animals, especially if there were not a vaccine that were present, that was used by the population, and that was effective. So if you did have high vaccination rates, high efficacy, all that, then maybe you wouldn't see a big culling event. But if one of those pieces didn't quite work out or wasn't so strong, then maybe you would. And you probably need to talk to people a lot smarter than I am, of which there are many, of course, who work on those issues to get a better picture of it. But that's my general understanding of it.
Now next question is from Ashish Pyakurel. How will you correlate antibiotic residues level in environment factors such as soil, water, food, and so on with antimicrobial resistance?
Mhm. One of the approaches you can take to that, and that's becoming more and more popular. I'm not familiar with the exact level of implementation, but moving towards whole genome sequencing can really help with identifying your genetic lineage with using molecular epidemiology, as it's called, which again is something I'm not incredibly well versed in. Basically, if you're able to sequence a lot of DNA, then you're able to basically trace the likely origins or kind of pathways through the ecosystem that antimicrobially resistant bacteria or antimicrobial resistance genes or plasmids or whatever have taken. So as more and more DNA sequencing technology becomes available for less money, then we're probably going to be able to see more and more of that in the future.
Thank you so much, Mr. Neil. It was great having you, and our knowledge on One Health has obviously grown hereafter. And thank you for answering the questions.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Also, we would like to take a feedback from you. How do you like the program as of now?
Oh, as in the webinar in general?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean it's really awesome what you've done here. Actually, I see this is a national level thing mostly. Is that correct?
Probably yes. Mostly.
Okay. So I've seen global webinars with less people than this. So it's really great that this many people are turning out. And it sounds like we have a lot of people from a lot of different educational backgrounds, if I'm not mistaken. So that also is really, really awesome because that's just not something you see all the time, especially getting dental students or whatever involved. That's something that's actually particularly rare in my experience with One Health, at least. So it's really great that we're able to get that you guys were able to engage all those people, and I mean that's you guys really deserve praise for that.
Oh, thank you so much. Now, thank you so much for the session, Mr. Neil.
Yep.
Now over to you, Supriya.
Thank you, Prakriti. And now moving forward, we have our another honorable guest, Assistant Professor of Microbiology at Nepal Medical College, Mr. Ram Prasad Adhikari, sir. And he is an enthusiastic professional, a professional, always curious and discovering new things. Recently, he has carried out the research on the topic of Enterobacteriaceae, a family of gram-negative bacteria which has been a highly antibiotic resistant. And today he is here for sharing his experience and the findings of the research. Please welcome him upon the stage.
Good morning, all. Are you audible?
Yes, sir.
First of all, I'd like to thank my dear students that you guys gave me the opportunity to disseminate some my findings and the research on Enterobacteriaceae. I'd like to thank Dr. Deo and Neil who disseminated some information regarding the antimicrobial resistance and global action plan to combat with the threat with the antimicrobial resistance that has been coming up. And another interesting concept that has been come up from 2015 that Neil just explained some things regarding this. Before going to explain or disseminate my research findings. I would like to congratulate the students for your active participations and eagerness to celebrate this AMR week, awareness week, uh, and your participations, active participations in these activities will help the community or help our country to control or to combat with this antimicrobial resistance which has been coming up with the threat. Okay, and I think students had very much um, interested to get some knowledge regarding the One Health approach. Uh, we have, um, once this concept has come up, as we all know, we are very much back or behind the technical facilities, um, even from the economic point of view and all those things. Though some researches has been going on in the human side, but in the animal side, some articles has been come up with the excessive use of antimicrobials in the human sides, sorry, animal sides, and their impact to the human health. Some papers has been come up, but in the environmental sides, there are no any that much formulated policies and the manpowers or the resources in our country. uh, in this sense, WHO has come up or has highlighted those developing countries or underdeveloped countries like Nepal, and they have come up with those One Health approach to these territories also. Once this One Health approach come up globally, WHO had given interest to have certain research on those One Health approach. NPHL, National Public Health Laboratory, as you all know, that is in Teku, and NPHL and the Central Queensland University, Australia, jointly they have in fund of WHO, they have come up with the research that they are doing on this One Health approach. I would like to share this information to the students. Luckily, we are also the participants on that surveillance program on these One Health approach. That NMC is also, our microbiology department is also participating on that. That they have come up with the how the resistance organism can be circulated from the environment, from the animals, and then to the human beings, and what is the impact that is under investigations or in our setup that is being um, come up nowadays. And one research that we are doing nowadays, that ESBL E. coli tricycle project. I think you have heard about the ESBL, extended spectrum beta lactamase producing E. coli. The tricycle project means the ESBL that are present in the animals, E. coli, Escherichia coli, which are the common organisms. Even in the human side, they are the normal flora or the common pathogens also, which is the member of the family Enterobacteriaceae. They are the normal flora in the animals and the pathogens in animals also, and they are commonly found in the environment also. Okay, so that's why one research that we are doing is that from the Escherichia coli, from the case of bloodstream infections in the human side, Escherichia coli that are present in the environment, that we collect from the sewage in different part of the Kathmandu, and then the Escherichia coli that are present as a fecal flora in the poultry, chicken. Okay, So that means we are isolating those organisms from these three different sectors. Okay, and then we will identify, we will detect the ESBL producing genes, and as just Neil just mentioned about the molecular
Excuse me,
analysis.
Norris. I think you'll need to change the slides.
No, no, no. I'm not. I have not any content on this ESBL tricycle project. I'm only disseminating you this fact. That means these ESBL E. coli, which are circulating in the humans, animals, and the environmental sector, okay, that we are investigating, and the molecular analysis is being done in Australia, Central Queensland University of Australia, and these molecular analysis will help. That is the genome sequencing, plasmid profiling, and all those molecular analysis will help us to track how the, or what is the cascade of transmission. Okay, what is the transmission cycle, where we are lacking behind, these things will be analyzed, right? That means this research will help us to explain or to know the importance of One Health approach in our context. Okay, and students had certain questions that how these what is the importance of One Health approach, uh, and how they correlate with each others. I think we have discussed more, that Neil also discussed more. I have come up with certain points which will be fruitful for you. Okay. Number one, same organisms are present either as a normal flora or pathogens in animals as well as the humans, and they are present in the environment also. So that's why there is the chances of the transmission of those flora or the pathogens from animal to humans, humans to environment, and environment to animals. Okay, that's why this is the cycle, right? That's why this tricycle project has been come up, okay, in our territory. Number one. Number second is same antibiotics can be used in veterinary science, agriculture, or even to the human beings, okay, to treat the infections, right? And use of those same or similar kind of antibiotics that may create the selective pressure among the bacteria. That's why they will become resistant. Okay. So for example, just Neil mentioned about the MCR1 gene. Okay, MCR1 gene. So this is the gene that are resistant for the polymyxin B and colistin resistance. Okay, colistin sulfate and polymyxin B resistant genes, that is the MCR1 gene. Okay, so these genes has been identified from the organism that had been isolated from the poultry. Okay, because polymyxin B and colistin sulfates are also commonly used antibiotics in the poultry. Because we use the chickens which might have the antibiotic residues that we will consume day by day, that create the selective pressures and may result the resistance to the antibiotics. This is one very simple examples. Okay, that means selective pressures. And another one is the consumption of uh, food producing animals or the agricultural items that have the antibiotic residues. Okay, and there are certain antibiotics which will not be deteriorated even we cook them, even we heat them, because some residues will be there in those food products. Once we consume that antibiotics at the low dose, they will create the selective pressure to the bacteria which are present in our body as a normal flora, and those flora can be the pathogens. Okay, and that can be resistance. Okay, so due to these problems, this One Health approach has come up. Okay, so now I will focus on my uh, slide. As you all know, these Enterobacteriaceae, uh, that is the large family with the diverse group of facultative gram-negative bacteria, rods. They are the common pathogens of healthcare and community-associated infections worldwide, and the drug resistance has been emerged on that. that we term them as multi-drug resistance or the pan-drug resistance, which is a major public health threat, as you all know, worldwide, and that poses a great challenge to combat the infections by them. Okay. The Nepal is also the one of the major contributors to the growing burden of these antimicrobial resistance among the bacteria due to different reasons. As we all know, or as we have discussed several times regarding these reasons, that is the widespread irrational use of antibiotics in all sectors, that is the human, animals, and the environment. They directly or indirectly affects or creates the selective pressure to the bacteria, so that the bacteria will acquire resistance to the antibiotics, and some pan-drug resistance, not only the multi-drug resistance, pan-drug resistance bacteria has also come up, and that have the very much serious infections, and we do not have any options to treat, because the pan-drug resistance organisms like Klebsiella pneumoniae, Acinetobacter species already being identified even in our setup. That's why the patients who has in critical care, if got acquire infections from those pan-drug resistance bacteria, it is very difficult to save. Okay. Similarly, poor healthcare systems. Several articles has been published that over-counter use of antibiotics, unnecessarily prescription of the antibiotics, prescription of the antibiotics by ineligible healthcare practitioners. Okay, due to the lack of knowledge and whatever. Okay, so these reasons, lack of awareness to the people's, lack of educations, these things contribute to the emergence of antimicrobial drug resistance, and poor infection control and infection preventive measures. I think Navina Mia, yes, Navina Mia had just asked regarding the syndromic management. Yes, syndromic management sometimes it requires, okay, to save the patient. But obviously, the use of broad spectrum antibiotics, which may not be useful or which may not be necessary to manage that patients that we prescribe, isn't it? This is the well-known fact in our territory, right? It may obviously leads to the antimicrobial resistance, but proper infection prevention practices that if we apply in our hospital setup, then the transmission of those resistance organisms can be prevented, okay, and the drug resistance rate can be minimized. Okay, these are the things that you have came up, and I'd like to clarify with this. So now see here, this is the articles that has been published in 2019 in Nepal by K.P. Acharya. And these articles has stated that, see here, the uses or consumption of the antimicrobials in food producing animals, because this is increasing day by day. See here, isn't it? The use of antimicrobials in food producing animals has been increasing. So these are the antimicrobials which are used to the animals or in the veterinary sector. See here, tetracycline we use to the human beings also, macrolides, polymyxin B, nitrofurantoins, quinolones, aminoglycosides, isn't it? The similar kind of antibiotics or antimicrobials to use in the veterinary science also, and the residues will be there in the environment also. Okay, so that's why they directly or indirectly impact on the acquisition of drug resistance by the microbial agents. Okay, so these things that I have already discussed, that I must disseminate these things, that ESBL tricycle project that we are doing in the collaboration with the National Public Health Laboratory TECU and Central Queensland University Australia on E. coli, Escherichia coli, ESBL producing Escherichia coli as a tricycle project based on the concept of One Health approach to know the link between these resistant genes. okay, how they are circulating, okay, to understand or to analyze all those things that we are contributing in this research study that I must disseminate to you. And some interesting questions were there regarding the AMR and COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, some debate has already been started that COVID-19 and the antimicrobial resistance, is there any relation or not? Okay, some of the articles has come up with that in these pandemic situations, due to the isolation of the patient, less visit to the hospitals, less transportations. Okay, so this may control the transmission rate of microorganisms, so that the resistance genes will not spread, and that will not have any impact on antimicrobial resistance. Okay, so some authors has come up with this debate, but most of the articles that you study, or if you go through the internet or the Google search, then there are some articles which has come up with this fact that the broad spectrum antibiotics has been commonly prescribed to the COVID patient as a prophylactic measures to control the secondary bacterial infections after the coronavirus infections, okay, to manage the patient. This is well-known fact that this is almost global practice. There are data also. That means these COVID-19 patients has been prescribed by the broad spectrum antibiotics that may lead to the antimicrobial resistance, obviously. See here, these articles has mentioned regarding that, see, this is the associated rise in rate of antimicrobial resistance. Okay, and some of also have the concept of that social distancing, isolations, reduced travel, okay, may also may result or do not have any impact on increase in antimicrobial resistance. So these all are the under debate. Okay, uh, mm, see, and another article also has been come up in few months back, that is COVID-19 pandemic will result in increased antimicrobial resistance rates. See here, use of broad spectrum antibiotics, okay, in the hospitalized COVID-19 patient, and excess of reported secondary infection rates suggests the unnecessary prescribing. Okay, so these prescriptions obviously creates the selective pressure to the bacteria or the flora which are present in the patient, that can be transmitted or that can be spread among the hospitals, and the antimicrobial resistance rate can be increased. Okay, however, this one is under the debate. Okay, and this is the articles that I have published almost 1.5 years back, and this is the research that I have done in our hospital in Nepal Medical College, and this is published in 2018, and this is a 6-month study, that is the antimicrobial resistant patterns in clinical isolates of Enterobacteriaceae. There are several research articles which has been published from our country regarding the drug resistant patterns among the bacteria. As you just mentioned that Enterobacteriaceae are the common bacteria to cause disease to the human beings, both in the community as well as in the hospital. Okay, and based on that, I have analyzed the resistant patterns of those Enterobacteriaceae isolates from the clinical samples, and the dissemination of these findings can be fruitful to you because there are some interesting findings in my articles that I would like to share with you. This one is was the descriptive cross-sectional study of 6 months that was done in our hospital in microbiology department, and from the different samples, we isolated 936 bacterial isolates of Enterobacteriaceae and analyzed for their drug resistant mechanisms. We identified them by the standard microbiological techniques, and we performed antimicrobial susceptibility testing also And we also screen for the multi-drug resistance bacteria and ESBL. As you all know that MDR means resistance to at least one antibiotics of three different groups. We regard them as MDR. And pan-drug resistant means almost all antibiotics. If the organisms are resistant to almost all antibiotics which are commonly used, they are called pan-drug resistance. Okay. However, some isolates that we have isolated in our laboratory are also pan-drug resistance, but I have analyzed only the multi-drug resistance equal Enterobacter and ESBL producing Enterobacter. Okay. See, almost 10,676 clinical samples, okay, that were analyzed, and among them, 1,900 clinical samples showed bacterial growth with the growth positivity rate of 17.79%, and the prevalence rate of Enterobacter was 49.2%. See here, among the 1,900 clinical sample bacterial clinical samples, okay, the growth positivity rate were 17.79%. That is 936 were Enterobacter, and among them 49%, 49.2% were the Enterobacter. Okay, and 8.76% of the total clinical sample processed were the Enterobacter. Okay, and of the total 936 bacterial isolates, 710 from the OPD samples and 226 from the inpatient. And it is obviously show because the samples from the OPD were more during our study, and the bacterial isolates 357 from male and 579 from female. And regarding the age group, the isolates were more commonly isolated or more common among the age group from 21 to 40 years. Okay, and see here this prevalence of Enterobacter from the different clinical samples. The common one is the Escherichia coli and Klebsiella species. Okay, and the more common isolates were them, and the more common in urine. Okay, and see here Salmonella, that is obviously that we isolate from the blood samples, 44. This is the prevalence of Enterobacter isolates. And very much interesting point is here, of the total Enterobacter, 54.2% were MDR, multi-drug resistance, and 23.8% were ESBL producers. As we all know that if the organisms are ESBL producers, they are naturally resistant to all penicillin group and cephalosporin group of antibiotics, which are the commonly prescribed antibiotics, isn't it? Right? That means that much number of organisms are ESBL producers. Then if we have the prescription practice without having the result of AST, or just you mentioned as a syndromic management, during that time the chances of having treatment failure and unnecessary use of antibiotics can be there, isn't it? So that may obviously lead to the antimicrobial resistance. Okay, and almost all ESBL producer with multi-drug resistance. Okay, and the rate of ESBL production and MDR among the Enterobacter isolates is more in inpatient, okay, IPD patient, right? They are more in inpatient. If you look in this figure, see here, this one is inpatient and red one is outpatient. See, both the MDR and ESBL producing bacteria are more in hospital, right? So that means this will help us to formulate the policy that the infection prevention practices that we are doing in our hospital is not proper. So that's why we have to formulate the policy of the proper infection prevention practices in the hospital. Okay. When we look the AST patterns, and the very interesting findings in this is that the commonly prescribing antibiotics like cefixime, ceftazidime, this cephalosporin group of antibiotics almost half of the bacterial isolates are resistant to these commonly prescribing cephalosporin group of antibiotics. Okay, so similarly, see here quinolone, ciprofloxacin and ofloxacins, almost 45% of the bacterial isolates are resistant to quinolones. So that means it emphasizes that it's time to look for the alternatives of these antibiotics, okay, as a safe landing antibiotics for the proper management of the patient. Though the second line antibiotics like as piperacillin, tazobactam, imipenem, meropenem, even the tigecyclines, these are the second line antibiotics, and less number of the bacteria are found to be resistant to those group of antibiotics, but they are the reserve drugs. They are relatively expensive, they have the relatively side effects, and they are the reserve drugs. That's why it's time to look for the alternatives of these antibiotics for the proper management of the patient. Okay. The key findings that I have already discussed, that the 54.2% of the isolates were MDR, 23.8% isolates were ESBL producers. MDR and ESBL producers are more in inpatient sample, and MDR ESBL productions common in Klebsiella and Escherichia coli in Enterobacteriaceae. And only less number of isolates are resistant to carbapenems. That is only the 10%, and this resistance could be due to the production of carbapenemase and metallo-beta-lactamase producers that I did not look for those resistant genes in this study. However, though the choice of drug for ESBL producing organisms are the carbapenems, and nowadays these carbapenems, as you all know, these carbapenems are commonly prescribed in the hospital, basically in the inpatient, in critical care patients. So now these carbapenem resistance isolates also has been come up, okay, due to the productions of other carbapenemase and the metallo-beta-lactamase producing organisms or these mechanisms. These have also come up. That's why it's time to think critically regarding the alternatives or the proper antibiotic stewardship policy in the hospital and all those things. Okay, so these are the key findings in my study, and I have concluded these findings from my research that I have already disseminated to our hospital infection control policy. That is the increased rate of resistance to the commonly used and relatively safer antibiotics like cephalosporins, explore the urgent need for alternatives to this group of antibiotics. Okay. Number two, low level of resistance against carbapenems and tigecycline were seen in this study, as I've already mentioned. This does add little hope to fight against the infection by MDR bacteria. However, these are the reserve drugs, okay, and they are relatively expensive, and they have comparatively, they have more adverse effect. Okay. And number third is, it's time to identify the causes and stop the spread of these resistance bacteria in the hospital as well as in the community. Judicious selection of antimicrobial regimens, regular antimicrobial resistance surveillance are important to tackle these issues. So this is my suggestions from this research that I have disseminated to you. If you have any queries regarding this research or anything regarding the antimicrobial resistance, if I know, then I'll try to answer it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your delightful response. We are very grateful to hear about your research. We have got this opportunity and we are very grateful. Thank you so much, sir, again. And if anybody have queries regarding the research and regarding the antimicrobial resistance, please feel free to drop it here. Also, so we have got some questions from the form. I'll be asking this. First question is from Sarah Imbersimi. How to act with a patient that has reached the resistance regarding an antibiotic?
How to how to
Act act with the patient that has reached the resistance regarding an antibiotic.
um, very good
Do you get
question.
it?
Very good questions. So that's why we have to think for the alternatives, and we must, if possible, we must rely on the laboratory results, that is the antibiotic susceptibility testing results, and we have to counsel the patient. We have to look for the alternative management and all those things. Okay, and act means only the counseling to the patient, that much, isn't it? So we should look for the alternatives if the organisms are MDR, and if not the antibiotics, if the patient is not responding to the antibiotics, then we should look for the alternatives, isn't it? And we have to look for the patient underlying conditions and the pharmacokinetics of the antibiotics, and we look for the alternative options. If there is no any options, then we have to counsel the patient. That's all. I think this is my opinion. Okay.
Thank you so much, sir. Another question, it's from Subham Kharka. Is there any guideline for prescriptions of antibiotic in Nepal?
Yes, there are guidelines, but we are not following. Okay,
So
there are
what is
guidelines.
the
There are guidelines in our country, but the every hospital setup should formulate the guidelines regarding the prescription of the antibiotics based on their previous research findings. Okay, so that's why AMR surveillance in the hospital is very much important to analyze those datas. Okay, for the prophylactic use of, or to formulate the policy in the hospital. Okay, so that's why the every hospital or the healthcare setup should have the infection control committee, and that committee should formulate the antibiotic policy, or each hospital should have the antibiotic stewardship, and that hospital should formulate the policy, and all the stakeholders which are there in the hospital should follow that policy. Okay, but we are not following.
Thank you, sir. Usha Khatri has raised her hand. Please feel free to ask the question.
Mm, Hello.
Yes.
Hello. As we have seen, one of the symptoms of COVID-19 as diarrhea. So, is Enterobacteriaceae is involved, or it is responsible for causing diarrhea in
No,
these
no, no,
cases?
no, no, no. This fact has not been come up. Okay,
Uh,
that is not due to the secondary bacterial infections. That is
yeah.
due to the virus as such. Okay, there is this is not come up till now. This fact is not come up till now. But I guess this is not due to the secondary bacterial infections. This is due to the virus as themselves. Okay.
So that might be rumor, but I have heard that my mother saying that somebody has diarrhea and died the second day due to diarrhea, or that might be rumor, but I have heard so. So,
It, it can be, but this fact not being explored till now. It
oh,
can it can be, but this fact not being come up or not
yeah,
being explored till now. Okay,
okay.
the diarrhea, not all the patients develops diarrhea. Or not all the COVID-19 patients develops diarrhea. That's why these all are under research. Okay, that's why this fact, the role of Enterobacteriaceae to have the diarrhea in the COVID-19 patients not been come up till now. These all are assumptions.
Then another question, that as mentioned guidelines to use antibiotics, then is there such particular guidelines though not followed but in global action plan of adopt in Nepal though not followed, there are particulars, are there? There might
No,
be.
no. Listen, the
Yeah.
guidelines should be formulated locally, because the guidelines which is prepared in the USA will not be helpful in Nepal. Okay,
Yeah.
these guidelines should be formulated locally by the local authorities. Okay, and
Okay.
that guidelines should be followed by all the stakeholders. So for that, some legislations issues are also there, legal issues are there, some act can be made. Okay, so that has to be formulated locally based on the scientific reasons or scientific basis. Okay, but same guidelines, same antibiotic prescribing policy may not be applied in all part of the world. Okay, that has to be formulated locally based on the previous research findings in your setup, in your healthcare setup. Okay, for example, in 1 year study, okay, in 1 year study, which organisms are the common organisms to cause the infection to your hospitalized patient, which organisms are the common to cause infection to the community patients, that you will analyze. Okay, and then you will analyze for the antibiotics, what are the common antibiotics that are found to be susceptible to the organisms which were isolated from the clinical samples in your setup. Okay, based on that and based on the other pharmacokinetics and patient underlying conditions, the policy makers will sit and then will make the policy, and that policy that all stakeholders has to follow.
Okay, sir. So then regarding this, COVID-19 is a global problem, right? There might be a proper guideline to say that don't use antibiotics or like that. Are there some? It is the global problem, so it might be the same
Yeah.
for all countries.
Even in the USA, even I had gone through some articles that has been recently published. Even in the USA, broad spectrum antibiotics is commonly used to the COVID-19 patient as a prophylactic measures, because the secondary
Yeah.
infection, that is pneumonitis by the bacteria, is very common in the COVID-19 patients. That is, in that concept, this broad spectrum antibiotics has been commonly prescribed even in the US or even in the developed countries. Okay, that's why there are several reports of using antibiotics to the COVID-19 patients. Okay, as a prophylactic measures to prevent from the secondary bacterial infections. As such, these antibiotics will not work on virus, as you all know, isn't
Yes.
it?
Yes.
Isn't it? But as a
Yes.
prophylactic measures, as a management or the symptomatic management, the to prevents the secondary bacterial infections and to go on the worst conditions. There are the evidences of using the broad spectrum antibiotics. That's why one group of people has come up with this debate that the overuse of these broad spectrum antibiotics in these pandemics, okay, in these pandemics may result to the antimicrobial resistance. Okay, another thing that I have to mention you and I have to disseminate you, that there are certain articles that were there. Okay, that I have also done one research work in collaboration with the university grant commissions regarding the acquisition of antimicrobial resistance to the bacteria by the use of antiseptics.
Hmm.
Isn't it? Phenol and the quaternary ammonium compounds, if we use rampantly in the hospital or in the community, that may leads to the co-selective pressure to the bacteria or to the organisms to develop resistance to the antibiotics, not only the antiseptics, to the antibiotics that we use. Okay, this is also the another fact that has to be come up. Okay, under the debate or under the discussions with this emergence of these pandemic conditions, because we are using rampantly the antiseptics, isn't it? Hand sanitizer and all those things. This is very common, isn't it? During these situations, so that may lead to the antimicrobial resistance. Though this fact has not been come up, this is under research. Okay, but when we go back to the previous articles regarding the antimicrobial resistance to the bacterial populations, the use of these antiseptics like as phenol and the quaternary ammonium compounds in the hospitals has lead to the emergence of drug resistance bacteria, antibiotic resistant bacteria. This is well known. Okay, so simultaneously we are using alcohol and other hand sanitizer and all those things rampantly are very common during these pandemics, and we may not say this may not lead to the AMR. Okay, however, this is not been published. This has to come under discussion.
Okay, sir. Thank you. No queries.
So we have got another question from MD Savir Alam. Why it is
Hmm?
very difficult to find out newer and more effective antibiotics in this modern world where we have very advanced technology?
That we already discussed, isn't it? We already discussed that the bacteria are very much clever than us. Okay, we will search for, as Dr. Deo just mentioned, that we will look for the target site, newer target site. For example, we search one new target site of the bacteria. We formulate the molecules of the antibiotics that will target on that bacteria, and that bacteria will become very much or will go on one step forward than us, and they will acquire resistance to those antibiotics. So that's why the investing companies, okay, that will invest trillions of dollars, okay, to search in that molecules targeting on the newer target groups. If the bacteria will become resistant, then nobody will purchase that antibiotics, isn't it? So that's why due to the chances of no profit, the no any private companies will be interested to invest trillions of or so many huge amount of money in that research. So that is the main reason why the newer antibiotics not been formulated. That's why one of the very much important arm, that is the 5 action plan of WHO in AMR, is number one is investment. So that's why there are 5 strategy plan of AMR action plan that is formulated by WHO. The one wing is the investment. So that's why to formulate the newer antibiotics targeting on the newer target site, we have to invest on research. If we invest on research, then the newer molecules will be formulated targeting on the newer target site. That is the reason, I think. But some facts has been common that the millions, trillions amount of money will be given to the football players, cricketers, artists, actors, isn't it? But there will be no investment to the scientist, isn't it? So that's why the newer molecules will not be there. I think this is the reason why the newer molecules not being identified. I think Neil has mentioned regarding the phage therapy. So now some concept of the use of bacteriophage to treat the bacterial infection has come up. Okay, several research has been come up to use the bacteriophage, that is the viruses which do not infect the humans but infect the bacteria. Okay, the use of bacteriophage can be one option to treat the bacterial infections. This concept has been come up, okay, as a therapeutic alternatives to combat with these bacterial infections, but we have to wait for it. Okay.
Thank you so much, sir. Sir, one last question for you. What can be done to prevent AMR beyond raising awareness? This was the question from Bhavana Pokhrel.
Beyond raising awareness,
Thank you so much, sir, for your delightful response. If anybody you have any queries regarding this topic, please feel free to drop the questions. Otherwise, let's uh, anybody any questions?
okay. If no questions, then thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir. We are very grateful to hear about your research. Uh, Now, I'd like to invite Miss Usha Khatri for her thank you speech. She is a coordinator of Standard Committee on One Health from IVSA Paklihawa. Please welcome her. Miss Usha Khatri.
Hello. Hello, everyone, and namaskar, first of all, and very pleasant afternoon, everyone. This is Usha Khatri, Standing Committee on One Health Coordinator, IVSA Paklihawa. First of all, would like to thank you all of our participants to make this make today's conference antimicrobial resistance. On antimicrobial resistance, One Health approach a great success. Antimicrobial resistance used to be nothing in the past, but with the modernization and overexploitation of medicine, it has been a great threat to us. And we got the great threat invitation from the antimicrobial resistance. And according to the WHO, who releases its report on global surveillance of AMR, we get to know that One Health approach is a very crucial step, and we should know the concept of one health approach, and it is the time when we get to know the One Health approach, and AMR is the greatest bond which we have to focus on. So on May 2015, there was an endorsement globally with a global action plan in which the World Antimicrobial Awareness Week is being held to be celebrated, and which is on November 18 to 24 November. And today's conference is also the part of the WAAW, that is World Antimicrobial Awareness Week, in which we are organizing an awareness program through this conference by the joint alliance of the IVSA Paklihawa, joint collaboration of the IVSA Paklihawa and Alliance Against AMR. So, and going through the awareness the program, we have also organized the 3 days online MUN conference, and also the video sharing program to aware the local people about the antibiotics and antimicrobial resistance. So today in this session, I would like to give a special thanks to Dr. Satish Kumar Dio, rector of Madan Bhandari Swasthya Vigyan Pratishthan, president, also the president of Alliance Against AMR, our collaboration organization, and our chief guest who has presented on topic National Action Plan to Combat AMR, and also the special gratitude to Mr. Neil Vezeau, trustee of International Student of One Health Alliance, ISHOHA, who is our guest speaker and who has presented a lovely and wonderful presentation on the topic AMR Veterinary Medicine One Health Approach. And also special thanks to Mr. Ramprasad Adhikari, Assistant Professor of Microbiology on Nepal Medical College, NMC, our guest speaker who had presented on the topic research on AMR in Enterobacteria and Enterobacteriaceae, in which he has presented his research on the Enterobacteriaceae also. And finally, though I'd like to say let's not make it a final conference. Let's make this type of conference on and on, so that we can aware many people about the antimicrobial resistance once in a year, with the main motto to say that if today is not here, then tomorrow also there will not be. So, and I guess with this conference, our participants and whoever are looking us has gained some knowledge and refreshed their knowledge on the antimicrobial resistance. So thank you for coming to this session, and great I would like to express great gratitude to our speakers today. And finally, I'd like to thank you for all of the participants coming in this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Sakhatri, for your speech. Now, I'd like to request you all to turn on your video camera, that's so that we could take a screenshot. Um, Please, all of you, I request you to open the video. Everyone, please. Prakriti, please screenshot the video, okay? Mm. By this, we have come to the end of this program. As we in today's event, I'd like to thank you all for joining the conference. In particular, I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to our special guests, Mr. Nal Viju, Mr. Ramprasad Adhikari, Dr. Satish Sir, for sharing their expertise with us. Also, I'd like to thank all of you for your active participations and open dialogues. I hope you have gained a lot of information and knowledge regarding antibiotic resistance from this conference. Without you all, this event would not have been so much successful. Hope for support in upcoming days as well. Thank you so much. By saying this, I like to end this event. Thank you very much for joining us.